When the railways came to this area, it was quite a revolution. Up to that point, it was the Rideau Canal that was the main route for traffic, commercial traffic and for passenger traffic, because there were no real roads, or roads that were reasonable and passable, especially in the winter. The canal had been the lifeblood of the entire region for all that time. But in 1854, a railway line reached Kemptville. It had started in Prescott, and it was the Prescott and Bytown Railway Company. Quite a number of the more prosperous citizens of the town invested in this company. Their plan was actually to link Kemptville with a railway line, then to link Bytown with, in other words, the Ottawa River, with the St. Lawrence River. And this was primarily to involve the timber industry, back and forth, down from the Ottawa River and the Ottawa Valley timber industry, down to the St. Lawrence and on into American markets. It was also obviously a great way to move people around that was faster. The railway also became a connection with the canal itself. The canal was still very popular because, of course, the railway went from one point to another. With the canal, you could go east, west, north, south. It linked Montreal to Kingston and the Great Lakes. The railway then, by having a stop in Kemptville, could then become a transit point. In the 1880s, the first big transcontinental railway line for Canada, the Canadian Pacific Railway, received a tremendous amount of government financing and land in order to connect the country. This new country had to be joined together, certainly in the view of people like the Prime Minister, John Macdonald. And so that railway passed through here too. So in the 1880s, you find the railway at the CPR crossing the old line at what's now Bedell. Bedell Station grew up at that point. It was the crossing point for the two big lines and therefore became very important.
Well, I was born in Kemptville, 1926, and as a youngster I hung around the tower at Bedell where my dad was the night operator from 12 o'clock midnight till 8 in the morning. He was on that job for 29 years, and then he was the agent from then until he retired with 52 years service, all at Bedell. And I learned the telegraph when I was in my early teens. And I started on the railroad when I was 16 in 1942. I got on the train at Bedell and went to Petawawa, and I started there as assistant agent. I was there for 3 months, and then I went back to school. And I was in the Army from the time I was 18 till I was 20, and I come back to work on the railroad. And I worked 42 years on CP in different positions.
The line through Bedell itself far outshone the original Bytown and Prescott line in terms of size, business, importance, because it was part of a transnational system. It wasn't dependent on one industry, like timber. It was something that received a tremendous amount of government support, as distinct from just individual investors and municipal investment, and clearly became one of the major infrastructure projects of the 19th century for Canada.
This is a profile of the trackage at Bedell. A single track, Ottawa to Prescott, was opened in 1854, and the two-track territory from Montreal to Smiths Falls and beyond west of Toronto was opened in 1884. And the several sidings at Bedell. Now, east of the station was two sidings. One was for cars, and then the back track was a cattle pen where they loaded stock there on Mondays for East End Cattle Market in Montreal and for Canada Packers in Hull.
So the station itself wasn't just at the crossing and wasn't just where the platform was and where the passengers got on and off. It extended right down as far as the road there. Basically, a settlement grew up around Bedell. It was much larger than it seems today. Passing through Bedell now with all the buildings gone and the crossing track gone, it again is very hard to imagine what it was like. The photographs give a very clear idea of the station itself, but the station was bigger than even the photographs that we have show.
This is a picture of the diamond. Because of the heavy traffic over that trackage there, it would wear out. And the welders spent a lot of time at Bedell welding the track back to proper position. One of my claims to fame, if you like, I detected a broken rail in the diamond at Bedell, and I was granted 5 merit marks for my sharp eye. You see these pipes along the track, they went up to the appropriate switch and locking device and signal. The interlocking was, there was a Y there, 2 Ys there, taking trains from Toronto to Ottawa, and Ottawa, or Smith Falls to Prescott. You see a car on the left-hand side of the picture. That was in what they called the South Y, which took trains and equipment off the Winchester subdivision to the Prescott subdivision. And the interlocking was the operator in the tower handled the switches. Inside the tower upstairs in Bedell, 40 levers, and 6 of them were not active. They're just there. They weren't used. The black switches, there were 6 of them, they were used to reverse the switches at various locations in the tower, in the yard. And to get them locked in position, they had to pull another lever, blue in color, and when that was finished, the red levers were activated to deliver the appropriate signal for the trains that were using the trackage. In the wintertime, because of the switches and so forth at Bedell, there was a section man was on job at night to go and clean out the switches as and when required, so that the trains that had to do switching could get into the appropriate track for setting off and lifting. He was company for the operator, by the way. It's kind of a lonely place to work at Bedell if you didn't live in the area. This is a picture of an operator at the desk. Could be copying orders or talking to the train dispatcher located in Smith Falls. And you'll see up over his head there the levers. If you wanted to reverse the train order signal on the top of the tower outside, he would activate that by raising it up. Yeah, the train order signal on the top of the tower was always displayed at stop for trains north and south, and so they always had to come up and get their orders and a clearance to keep going on the Prescott subdivision. Now in the Winchester subdivision, it was at clear unless the operator had train orders for the approaching train. See the train orders hanging there? Train orders would be put out, bulletins they called them, and they'd hang them on the hooks there, and when the train was needed to be cleared to go to a certain destination, the operator would get whatever numbers are needed, put it on a clearance and address it to the train, and that's how they handle it. That's how they got their instructions. Now in this one, the train's going east, and you can see the train order signal on the top up high there is horizontal, so that means that the operator would be having some orders for that train. By the way, trains were supposed to reduce speed going over the diamond at Bedell. I think it was 50 miles an hour speed limit. Some of them went much faster than that, particularly the passenger trains. We had to be down there handing up train orders standing right beside them. It was a hairy, scary time. Sometimes they'd miss the hoop. You had to hold them up on a hoop, both to the front end of the train on the engine and to the caboose, which was on trains in my day working there.
And if they would have missed the orders, then what?
Had to stop.
Oh, wow.
Which was a very serious matter, having to stop and maybe back up to get the train orders. There's my famous picture of the trekkers, they called them, in the 1935, loading onto the trains right in the heart of the Depression. Those were sad days. There was a hobo jungle at Bedell, just west of the tower, in the bush. Now right in here where this facility is here, that's where the hobo jungle was that I talk about, right there. and that's where the hobos used to be there back in before the war, before World War II. When we were just young kids, we'd be over there with they called them hobos, or whatever you want to call them, but they were hobos. One morning, three kids were in there talking to four fellas there. They were having a cup of tea mid-morning, and they wanted something for supper. They gathered up among them 10 cents. 10 cents. They got over and went over to and got on the back end of the steam engine on what they called number 35, the Montreal-Toronto passenger train. They went to Marrickville, and at 4:20, when the reverse train was coming from Toronto to Montreal, they came off and they had a loaf of bread, and that's what they had for supper. Yeah. Those were tough times, really, back in the 30s. Yeah, the water tower was just located east of the station. It was a nice, cool place to go in the summertime because there was no air conditioning around Bedell when we were kids there, and it was nice and cool under the water tower. And the water was shipped. The water came down from Swan, which is was about 3 or 4 miles west of Bedell. It was piped down to the water tower, and there were three hydrants, 2 hydrants on the Winchester subdivision, and 1 on the Prescott subdivision for the engines to take water. Oh yeah, plumbing. We had no indoor plumbing there, and the appropriate outhouse was about 60 feet away from the tower. When it was necessary to go there was not much downtime. In the wintertime it was cold, and in the summertime the mosquitoes were bad there. And there were appropriate reading material. Eaton's catalogs were there in the toilet for appropriate use, reading, etc.
Talk about the water.
Oh yeah, there was in the early 40s, there was no water in the tower, and the operators had to go to a well in the neighborhood to get water for the drink. So they installed a water tank and a water spout in the lower part of the tower. In the lower part of the tower was where the signal maintainer's office was, and that's where the tap was. And during the Depression, there were a lot of hobos. They'd come in there and stay downstairs. They never bothered us, never come upstairs. And back in the early 40s, there were several, we'd see these prisoner of war trains coming through there. And there was one fellow jumped off the train going into Smiths Falls. And he made his way to Johnstown, just east of Prescott, got across the St. Lawrence River by boat, got into the hospital in Ogdensburg. The U.S. were not in the war yet. This was 1940. And he made his way from Ogdensburg to New York, and German people there took him in and looked after him. And he flew to Mexico City, from Mexico City to Rome, and Rome back to Berlin. And Hitler made a hero out of him. He was shot down in Holland later on in the war. I forget just now. His name was Franz von Weira. How do we know? He might have been staying in the tower till he got a train going out to Johnstown. You can see in this picture the train order signals are gone from the top of the tower at Bedell. That means it's near the end of the line there for that tower. Now those wires behind there, they'd be used for dispatchers' lines so they could be in touch with all the stations along the way. This is a picture of the Kemptville Station. When I was 15, I had my first job there as assistant agent at Christmas time. A man by the name of Bert Harvey was the agent, and there was quite a bit of traffic, and he hired me on the side to handle traffic right across the track from the station, in and out of the freight shed. That was a nice building. It's too bad it was taken away.
So the railways became the main transportation route, the main lifeblood, the highways of the community. They now replaced the rivers, which had been replaced by the canal, and now we're going to be replaced by the railway. They in turn, of course, certainly as passenger routes finally were replaced by the roads, the highways. And the roads, as they became wider, paved, as cars and private vehicles became more and more common, then the railways no longer had the same level of importance in the community. And as we know then, the line which was the Bytown to Prescott Railway closed. CP closed it, and in recent years we've seen the tracks taken up and the land being used for the trail system in North Grenville.
In 2010, 2011, the municipality undertook an integrated trail strategy project, and the municipality did receive a grant through the Ministry of Health Promotion at the time to undertake this project. Once the project was completed, one of the identifiable trails was the abandoned rail line through the village of Kemptville.
We actually did the purchase over 2 stages. The current layout of the actual road network is on old CP land, and so we had to purchase a certain section just to maintain the transportation network, but the idea of purchasing the whole rail line is to have for recreational and municipal linkages. The reaction to from the community was great. They liked the idea of the linkages, the active transportation. It's not only used though for pedestrians and cyclists, but also from a winter standpoint from the snowmobile club. So it was very positive. Also from a development standpoint, it was positive from the development community because we could expand our water and sewer network to serve that quadrant of town.
One of the pieces that we're trying to do is with some of our trails is to do some education, interpretive signage, or telling stories about the history of North Grenville. So the rail trail, for example, there is an obviously history there of CP using it for many things for many, many years. So we're working with different groups in the community to try and come up with historical pieces that, you know, if you're walking along the rail trail, maybe there's some interpretive signage along there that can tell a story to people.